Hey everybody, this is Wintermute. So I've decided I want to talk about some of the expansions directly. I've been wanting to kind of do this for a while. Something kind of prompted this, which I'll go into in a minute. But when I talk about each expansion, I'm going to talk about what I like, don't like about it, whether it works, whether it doesn't work. And I'm going to be as fair-handed as I can, but I'm also going to be as honest as I can because quite frankly, some of the expansions for Global War 36 are problematic. And I would never recommend playing with them. And some are great. Some are absolutely fantastic, and I'm looking forward to playing with. And they're like an immediate go-to if the opportunity presents itself. Now, I'm specifically starting off with the Spanish Civil War for a couple reasons. One, it's one of the oldest expansions, and it kind of shows. And I'll go into that in a bit. But, as some of you have probably seen on Panzer King's channel, I'm going to be taking part in the Crimson Tide coming up, the YouTube war. And at one point, the Spanish Civil War was one of the expansions we had talked about using and had planned on using. But things started to break down after a while. The more we read about it, the more we understood it, the more we kind of saw the problems with it. And there are many. And eventually we just decided, you know what, we're just not going to play with this because it just invites too many problems, way too many problems. So I'm going to talk about it directly. Now, let me say, and I've said this is one of my highest rated expansions, and it's definitely been knocked down probably off that list now that I've had the chance to try and think about how to put it into effect, and I see some of the problems. Now, I knew about one of the problems right off the bat going into this, but I figured, oh, you know what, as a group, we can just kind of house rule that away and just kind of say whatever. Not the end of the world. But then more and more just sort of showed up, and it's like, okay, this really isn't worth our effort. There's too many problems with it, and it needs to be updated. The core rules for the expansion need to be updated. Now, I am not going to go into the Admiral Edition. The Admiral Edition is its own animal and deserves its own review. And I have read the Admiral Edition rules, and I think I'm pretty good at understanding rules. But I read that and I went, oh my God, there's a lot here. This is very different, and I look forward to giving it a try one day. But it really isn't. It's not high on my priority list right now. So I'm going to talk about just the Spanish Civil War as it is, and how it interacts with the base game. Now, most of the key points stay very similar to the base game. Oh, and one thing that was worth pointing out right now, before we get started, right off the bat, now I already know this, but people who read this can probably read the rules for it can probably tell it was written for a different edition, and it shows. It has not been updated for this edition, I'll point out all the reasons why as I kind of move along here. Or the blatant reasons why it's a problem and how it doesn't merge with this edition very well. But most of the core concepts are the same. They're simply expanded upon. So, self-contained battleground, the end of the Spanish Civil War is the same. There are also, the Lend-Lease options they're tweaked. So you can Lend-Lease some additional things in the form of facilities, and then you have the option to give supply markers. But Lend-Lease itself isn't quite as clear-cut in this game, or with the expansion, and I'll get to that in a bit. Recruitment and conversion for supply markers, that's pretty standard when you see supply markers in most of the expansions right now. That's how it gets used, where you either make an additional recruitment die roll or you expend it to upgrade a militia to a regular infantry. Now, there's these expanded intervention options. Now, before I go too far into these, let me just say I've never seen or heard of a player ever using any of these for the Axis or the Allied or the Comintern in terms of the full intervention and partial intervention that this expansion kind of talks about. Now, there's the expanded, and then there's the full intervention. Now, the expanded is they can send the Condor Legion, they can send a single German aircraft, and it stays a German aircraft, and the Condor Legion stays a German unit during the war. It doesn't become a actual nationalist unit. Full intervention, again, I've never seen anybody even take this. I'm not even going to go into it. Especially, same thing with expanded Italian intervention. Or I'm sorry, full Italian intervention. Now with expanded, it can send one of its own infantry in addition to any lend-lease. And again, it's like, okay, well they can double it up basically. But the Italian sending it is a lot less useful. It's basically going to be doing guard duty for most of the game, which maybe that's what you really want it to. Maybe that's all you want it to do. Because they don't move, they move on the German turn. And the Allied intervention option, British full intervention, again, you know, I could see maybe the German player taking this option if things are going really badly for the Axis and they're like, I got to get in there and I got to end this now because that's worth 2 victory points, one for me, one for Italy. We got to get in there now and end this. But other than that, I just don't see it happening. There's the British full intervention again. United States intervention is very. All the U.S. says is, all right, I'm either supporting this guy or this guy. I'm either supporting the nationalists or the Republicans. And then whoever I support, and I don't have to, but if I decide to support one or the other, they get a -1 to win rolling for recruitment, and then that's it. They can't send lend-lease. They can't do anything like that. So they are not a player that can lend-lease, and I don't see any option that ever changes. Even if they become a full-fledged ally, like the Spanish Civil War goes on late into the game, whereas the French and the British may still have the option to lend-lease in some form or another. The U.S. their option never changes. And these are a couple things that I'm just touching on as concepts, and I think they need to be fleshed out a little bit more personally, because especially, and again, for the edition that this was written for, maybe these made a lot more sense, but in this edition, they seem like the wording is problematic, and maybe all the possible permutations that you should be able to see when you write a rule like this, it seems like they haven't been addressed. And so there's a lot of gray area for some of these, in my opinion. Common turn intervention options. Now, this first one's pretty good. You just roll a 1, you get an extra guy. Aircraft licenses, not likely to use. Popular support. Some of this stuff is like, okay, yeah, it makes sense. It's flavor. But again, I don't hear of many people using it. Now, here's an example where it definitely needs to be updated, and that's outcomes of the war. And that's the Spanish Blue Legion. If the nationalists win the Spanish Civil War, it will assist Germany while neutral. If Germany and the USSR at war, once these conditions are met, place an infantry in Madrid with the Blue Legion marker underneath it. This unit is supposed to rail the next German non-combat movement phase to a German-owned land zone. So right there you can see that this is a much different victory condition than what they have in the core rules. This is much more restricted, much less of a bonus, and while yes, constantly getting a single infantry every turn for winning the Spanish Civil War for the common turn or the Germans is definitely an overstatement historically. It makes sense because there's something at stake. That's actually a pretty good bonus in addition to whatever victory points that are there for whoever wins the war. So I like that. I like that in the base game they've upped it to a full infantry every turn once the Spanish Civil War is completed. Submarine base, if the nationalists win the excuse me. This one, it just doesn't, it's more die rolling that isn't necessary in my opinion. Here's another chance. Now the common turn victory. If the Republicans win the Spain, it spurs communist movement in other nations as well. The USSR can immediately make a dice roll for each of the following nation. If it gets a 12, that country becomes aligned to the USSR. So Mexico, Central America, and Yugoslavia. Now, this is a very, very low probability of happening, but it has a potentially high impact on the game, depending on the circumstances. And you can see that, again, this is the only thing that the common turn get. They don't even get their international brigade that they get in the base game. And I think they should. Here, it's handled differently here. They get that international brigade up here if they roll a 1 on the recruitment. And I just think all of these victory conditions need to just, at the very least, be updated to represent the base game. at the very least. And then if you want to throw in some other aspects in addition to the base game, well, that makes sense, yeah. So now you have this additional roles for the Comintern victory. They can still do that in addition to the base game, and that's just one of the features of this expansion. So that definitely needs to be updated. A lot of, like I said, and as a designer, if people aren't taking these options, then you need to reevaluate them and kind of go with how is this going to change? How is this, if nobody's using it, how do I have to change it so that it becomes a viable option or a useful option for people to change in a way that doesn't break it, doesn't make it overpowered, still keeps it somewhat historically accurate and possible. And if you can't really reach that point, maybe that feature doesn't need to be in the expansion. Now, I'm just kind of saying that in general. I'm not criticizing any one particular aspect. But like I said, I don't ever see myself ever kind of using any of these kind of special rules. There is a super big and problematic exploit in this expansion, though, that has been known about for years and still hasn't been addressed within the rule set. It's addressed in the base game because it just doesn't happen in the base game. And that is at the end of the Spanish Civil War. Sorry, I don't know why my camera's not focusing. Maybe my hand is messing it up. The USSR and Germany, the USSR and Germany are at war and align their respective sides. So the Spanish Civil War is over when the USSR and Germany are at war and align their respective sides. Here's the problem. What happens is the German player who has the distinct advantage overall in general with the Spanish Civil War fights back the Republicans to one territory, and then that's it. They just stop fighting the Republicans. They never finish them off until much later in the game. And the reason they do this is because if the Spanish Civil War is still happening, what'll happen, Germany then declares war on Russia. That immediately triggers the nationalists to align with Germany and the Republicans to align with Russia. So that means you now have Spain is full of German units that are now going to march into Gibraltar right off the bat. That's the first thing they're going to do. So that in and of itself is a problem, because that is a very highly sought after prize by the Axis players for a multitude of reasons. And it's gamey. There's no reason why they wouldn't want to just finish off the Republicans and end the Civil War. But you now have created this rule that allows them to do just that, just stand there staring at them, and now they can invade Gibraltar. It also creates another problem, which isn't quite as obvious. In the base game, when the Spanish Civil War ends, what happens is you then have the alignment conditions for whoever won are stated within their respective winner. So the nationalists will align with Germany once A, B, and C happens, and then they align with Germany. Russia will, the Republicans, Spain, will align with Russia when A, B, or C happens. And that's it. They just take control of them when those conditions are met. And as a German player with the base game, it's perfectly, one of the questions you have to ask yourselves about the Spanish Civil War in the base game is, how much resources do I want to commit to that war to make sure I win? Now, if I am very confident as the German player that I'm going to meet the alignment conditions for Spain, I have a plan to do it and pull it off, and I'm going to meet those conditions, then you might be more willing to put more resources into it because you're fairly confident those resources will become yours again. Now, that is definitely a way to think about it. That's a way to plan around it, but that is in no way a guaranteed thing to happen. You have to fight to get to those victory conditions to align Spain. So it's not an automatic thing. You may get blasé about it. All right, sure, here's a fighter, here's a fighter, here's a fighter, here's a fighter, whatever, I'll get them all back later. But then you never manage to meet those conditions, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I wouldn't have put that much money into Spain. Whoops. Now they're sitting there with the 4 fighters that, man, I could really use at least 1 or 2 of those back up here in Germany. With this exploit, and it is an exploit, where now Germany can just lend whatever it wants to Spain, just every turn, basically, so long as they're capable of doing it. And they know they're going to get it all back because they're never going to finish the Republicans. They're going to declare war on Russia. Spain aligns, they take Gibraltar, which is a good prize, and they immediately get back all their units. Now, the only real counter argument to this is, well, that also gives America kind of an easier foothold. And I'm like, trust me, that's not a huge downside in my opinion. Because it lets Germany, gives Germany a decent shot at taking Gibraltar. Now, it's not a guaranteed thing. Dice are dice, and circumstances in every game can be a little different. But it is gamey, and it doesn't make sense historically why they're going to just sit there and stare at each other like that. So that's a problem. And this has been I didn't find this exploit. I didn't even know about this exploit until like maybe 6 months ago. And then somebody pointed out to me, and he's like, oh yeah, we've known about this problem since basically the expansion came out. I'm like, oh, okay, so we've known about this problem for a long time and nobody's updated this. That's frustrating as a consumer, but there it is. There it is. So there's that problem. There's the problem with the victory conditions. There's one other thing which is superfluous is the way that they add armored cars to the game. Armored cars basically don't really do much. They're just another unit to put on the board. There's no special ability. It's got the exact same stats of a cavalry, but no other bonuses. So why you would ever build one is beyond me. And the only thing that happens differently with this expansion is the Republicans get 1 in Madrid to start the game with, and the Germans get 1 in Germany to start with. So, the Republicans get they get 1 extra unit to start the game with, which I don't think is that huge of a deal. You could argue maybe, that 1 extra unit can make a difference, especially with starting with it on the board. But it's still an armored car. It's like, who cares? It's an armored car. Nobody will ever build one. There's 1 in Germany and there's 1 in Madrid, and those are the only 2 that will ever exist in this game as long as we play. So it's a completely useless unit. Another thing that is, now you also have these random events. Now I like most of these random events. And these get rolled on the German turn at the start of each year. And most of them are not terrible. There's 1 or 2 that are, well, there's a couple of questionable ones about how they work out. Franco supports the Axis. If Germany is at war with Britain when this is rolled, Spanish nationalist forces may attack Gibraltar. Now now Britain may select the full intervention option for the Republican side. Now, my question is does this apply for the remainder of the game? Does it apply only while the Spanish Civil War is in effect? Thus, they can only attack Gibraltar while the Civil War... there's some questions there about how that one works. But that's just an example where some of the wording needs to be cleaned up on some of these. But here's the one that is just absolutely infuriating as a British player, and it is way too harsh. It's this number 6. So it's right in the middle. It's likely to get rolled. Pacifism. The horrors of the Spanish Civil War decreased democracy's appetite for war, reduced Britain's income by 3, and the US and France by 1. Now, imagine you're the Commonwealth player, and the German player starts their turn, very first turn of the game, and they pick up a dice, and they roll it, and they hit 6. Okay. Back when there was another version of this Axis and Allies that I played from Xeno Games, where it started right at the beginning of the war. So basically, very first turn, Germany went into France. And occasionally the German player would go in, and the die rolls for France were just so good. And the German players, and we're talking like they went in with everything they could muster. And the German players' rolls were so bad that the German player just got decimated. Even if they most likely still took Paris, but they lost 75% of their forces when doing it. We would just reset the game. There's nothing left to play with this game, guys. We're not going to force the German player to go through this garbage just because he got diced on the very first combat of the very first turn of this game. That's not right. So we're just going to reset it and re-roll, and it came in much more normal, much more within a kind of reasonable range. Even on the good or bad, or even on the bad side, you can still. But when we're talking, they lose 75% or more of their forces with their initial invasion of France. Just reset the game. Okay. If you roll number 6 on the very first turn of this game, honest to God, reset the game. I already now this is a little bit of a now this is bad enough on its own. I'm going to throw a little bit of an opinion in here about the Commonwealth. I already think the Commonwealth already struggles so much in this game to and this is part of the reason why I think the game is skewed towards against the Allies in the overall sense of things, is they're already so cash starved at the beginning of the game with so much to do. If you take that, sure, they start off with, assuming you're not using the Canada expansion, they start off with $11 that first turn, but then the following turn, they collect 8, assuming that they collect 9, assuming Germany has done at least one annexation. Although maybe then the German player goes, yeah, you know what, maybe I won't annex. Maybe I'll wait and punish you even more as the allied player in terms of your economy. And then France loses $1 too, and then America loses $1 too. That's a lot of money that the Allies lost on a single die roll during the game. Now, that's before the war even starts, and that's when there's most cash starved. Especially if it's roll, and I mean, how many turns does America stay at peace, before they finally enter the war? I'm not even gonna look at the one, let's say 10, let's just say 10 turns. 10 turns before America has any even reasonable shot of getting into the war. So right now, America's down $10. Okay, France is gonna be down $5 roughly, and I'm just estimating $5. And Britain's gonna be down $12. You know what? Reset, re-roll, and just start over. That's how horrendous that roll is, in my opinion. And I think that they need to rework that one. That one needs to be reworked in general to keep the same concept, but not affect the IPP levels. That's such a heinous penalty to the Allies. So yeah. Now, most of the rest of these I don't have a problem with. They seem fine. I think, again, the wording needs to be cleaned up and updated and clarified. Maybe some need to be struck from this list completely. I don't know. At this point, I don't even want to play test it as it is. It's already got it's already got too many problems, and as a consumer, it's frustrating that here we are and we're in 3rd edition, and this still hasn't been updated for 3rd edition. It still has not been updated for 3rd edition, and that's frustrating as a consumer. Quite frankly, if I didn't already own this expansion, I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't, and I would definitely recommend other people don't buy it until it gets a rules update. At the very least, a rework. At the very least, an update, let alone a rework, and that's really what it needs. It needs a rework. So yeah, unfortunately, I have to basically say at this point, this is unplayable. This is an unplayable expansion at this point, and I wouldn't recommend it. And it's unfortunate because I love the idea of going deeper into the Spanish Civil War. But in my opinion, you're far better off just playing with it as written in the core rules and just going with that. Don't bother with this until things change with the rules update. Now, maybe the Admiral Edition gives us a whole fresh take on it. But again, that's not everybody's cup of tea, because I know it's a lot more complex. That's a separate purchase. If that one rocks, then don't even bother with this one. Just buy the Admiral Edition. And that's not good for HBG when they're trying to move product. So yeah, right now I wouldn't play with this, and I wouldn't recommend anybody buy it. And I don't like saying that, but as somebody trying to give an honest review about an expansion and its impact on the game and whether it's worth your money, this one is not worth your money. So if I'd like to hear some other opinions down in the comments below if you disagree with me. But for right now, this is Wintermute signing off. Hey everybody, it's Wintermute. I want to do a quick addendum to this video because I went back in and I wanted to double check something in the rules to make sure that I spoke correctly. And I stumbled across another aspect that So I referred to, and I am not the only one who has referred to the just dragging the war out so you can invade Gibraltar from the mainland of Spain. I am not the only one. I didn't coin the term calling it an exploit. That's how it was referred to by me, by other well-known gamers within the global war community. And everybody referred to it as an exploit. It's an exploit, it's an exploit, it's an exploit. And it actually, when you read the design notes, you actually realize something. It is a deliberate design feature. Yeah, it's a deliberate design feature. I will go as far as to say I don't know why the original designer thought that was a good idea. I really, honestly don't. Maybe it made perfect sense in second edition. Great. I really think that it pisses on any sort of historical reality of the situation. I really, and the way that the Spanish and the Republicans align anyway within this expansion, I think is not, like I said, not only is it problematic, it's also historically inaccurate. I feel the argument could seriously be made, and I am not the only one who stated that. I know other people have supported that opinion, completely independent of me. So yeah, okay, it's not an exploit. It's a deliberate design feature. It's still problematic. Still very problematic. And you know, vehemently, I know people have stated that as the explicit reason, the main reason, the number one reason that exists is the main reason they don't want to play with the Spanish Civil War. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. And that's another reason this expansion needs to be updated. So I just wanted to clarify that. It's okay. It's not an exploit. It's a deliberate design feature, but it is still problematic. And I stand by that statement. And I'm sure I will be backed up on that. Though, if you disagree, yeah, go ahead and leave a comment below. And this is Wintermute out again.